Hey guys, last week we had a bad day here. We had to talk about the insane meltdown of Matt Hansen, art director of Avowed, when he went and lost his mind over Elon Musk and Grum's being against the inclusion of pronouns in some menu of Avowed. In my video I drew some comparisons of this pattern that we've been seeing throughout the year. Specifically I compared it to what we've seen happen with Dragon Age Veilguard, a fantasy RPG that decided to water down the integrity of its genre and setting by introducing certain ideological aspects into it and doing it in the worst way possible instead of doing it, for example, like Baldur's Gate 3. Now, Dragon Age Veilguard, before launch, we didn't really know that much about it. We just mainly knew that there was going to be a non-binary character and that you had the possibility to do top surgery scars in the character creator. That was basically the main thing right at the very beginning, and then something similar to what happened with Matt Hansen happened, where, as a reaction to certain clips from previews of the game, certain current and previous developers of BioWare took to social media to cope and insult their fans for having opinions that they did not like. I know, guys, I know. You could argue that it's all anecdotal, but hey, a pattern is a pattern, and this year in this industry, patterns have been extremely reliable in being able to tell us just how screwed up a game is going to be. It sure was for Veilguard. Like, all the things that we saw before launch were like, well, it was pretty bad when you think about it. The terrible looking cartoony style, the oversaturated colors, the bad dialogue and the extended gameplay that they released, the top surgery scar dedicated button, the total inability to create a female character with prominent female features despite calling this game inclusive, the elimination of blood magic and other story and roleplay aspects in order to simplify the narrative, so on and so forth. Oh, and of course, also this entire page from the developer diary of the director, Corinne Bush, who filled the section about what Dragon Age is meant to be as an RPG, as a game, with a bunch of identity politics and pandering that had nothing to do with what this franchise is about. The signs were all there, and regardless of that, a lot of people, myself included, still remained somewhat hopeful that the whole thing wouldn't be so bad. But the truth was that it was beyond cooked, and nobody could have prepared the world for the full brunt of Tosh as a character and as an instrument of pure cringium. So yeah, patterns definitely matter. It's not to say that it's always going to be a solid metric, that it's going to be right 100% of the time, but we should also mention these things and discuss them and, keep them in mind when we're making decisions, and make sure that we do not pre-order anything. And also, number one, make sure that we wait for trusted reviews from trusted sources rather than just the shill media that does not work for the consumer anymore. They work for the corporations. Dragon Age Veilguard's review embargo was lifted 3 days before everyone else got access to the game, and the internet was awash with 9s and 10s glazing the game, and there were only 2 notable reviews that were not so positive, which were from Mr. Matty and Skilla. This was because BioWare filtered the review process. They made sure that everyone that gave the game a negative preview did not get an early copy to review it. So yeah, if you needed any more reasons to not trust the 9s and 10s that you may see, and to not trust the Metacritic score from the critic side, then there you go. Much like the initial status of Veilguard, we don't know much about Avowed right now, but one thing that we can definitely be sure of is that Obsidian's behavior in the past couple of days has been absolutely abhorrent. It plays into this terrible pattern, and that's what I want to talk about right here for a little bit, so let's just get into it. Coincidentally, I had this interaction yesterday on the comment section of a fellow Ford Focus. A fellow Ford Focus. A fellow Portuguese YouTuber whose Fallout content I absolutely adore. Her video was about the demonization of Fallout New Vegas fans. She goes into how, within the wider Fallout community, there's a lot of spite thrown around at New Vegas fans, and sometimes it's not even relatable. Like, you can just be a guy, a regular, Tony, who thinks that the show was really not that great, and people will call you a New Vegas shill or a Bethesda hater, almost like us getting called chuds for enjoying Black Myth Wukong and Stellar Blade instead of dogshit age Blandguard. Anyway, it's an interesting and very entertaining watch, and I totally recommend their channel to you guys if you like that kind of content. In the comment I just mentioned how we are at a point where both Bethesda and Obsidian have fallen so low that they leave me feeling very hopeless for their future games. As a fan of Skyrim and even Fallout 4, I can say that Fallout 76 and Starfield have killed my hopes for Elder Scrolls 6. And when it comes to Obsidian, it's well, it's a little bit complicated. I took The Outer Worlds as it was, you know what I'm saying? I stepped into that game with a totally open and fresh mind. I did not think about Obsidian's previous work, and even though Obsidian took it upon themselves to advertise The Outer Worlds with a direct phrase from the creators of Fallout, I decided to step into it without thinking of New Vegas at all. I totally detached it from my mind, and I just played it as it was, and I enjoyed it, kinda. My enjoyment of Outer Worlds is akin to my enjoyment of Andromeda. It's filled with caveats, and these are caveats that I can hold on to personally, that I can deal with personally, but that I could never lay on to my audience if I was reviewing these games. I would have to give it to you guys straight and tell you that these games do not represent these companies at their best and that there's no excuse for that. Although obviously Andromeda is a much worse case of what I'm talking about. Some people look at The Outer Worlds and see a lot of ideological injections. I personally do not. The satire against the corporations is hardly different than, for example, the type of satire that we find in GTA games, which everyone is always fine with as well. I am not a fan of retroactively applying ideological lenses and trying to yank ideological meaning out of things that do not seem ideological in nature. It's kind of like being in a literature class and having to over-examine everything an author wrote in a book. As the age-old meme goes, sometimes when an author writes that the curtains were blue, it doesn't mean that the author is trying to pass on a meaning of deep depression, melancholy, and whatever the fuck else. Sometimes it just means that the curtains are fucking blue. Similarly, the satire in the setting of Outer Worlds ragging on evil, greedy corporations to the point of comedy is just what it is. To me, it's not a studio telling me to reject capitalism and embrace socialism. I think that's one hell of a stretch, but whatever. And you know what, it's actually the same with Fallout 2. There's some woked out movements out there that I've seen on social media trying to adopt the Fallout franchise as a hyper successful example that pushed their ideologies because of its setting. People try to say that it's a game vehemently criticizing capitalism, American imperialism and colonialism and shit. See how this stuff can be done by both political sides, but at the end of the day it's just a fucking setting with a great story and world building and not a stupid piece of commie propaganda or whatever. I think the creator even had to come out and say that it wasn't a critique on capitalism. I'm gonna try to find some receipts of this, but if I don't find them, you guys are just gonna have to take my word for it. So anyway, my issue with The Outer Worlds does not come from that. It comes from the lack of seriousness and the lack of stakes. I also didn't care for the visual design of things. I also didn't like how the developers had this attitude of not including romance options in their game and justifying it as romance being too complex to make. Like, this just screams of laziness, to be honest. They seemingly use the same excuse for the lack of romance in Avowed as well. At least that's what I read, but take it with a grain of salt. I like romance options in my RPGs. I think that it's a very, very good element to add to these kinds of games, unless of course it's done like Veilguard, where all the characters just fucking suck. Even Andromeda had better fucking characters to romance. I did 2 runs and I did it with Vectra and Cora, and Cora had a whole ass fucking sex scene. Like, holy fuck, I can't believe they actually sat down to animate that. Actually, they didn't even animate it now that I'm thinking about it. They didn't fucking animate it. They had the actors do that shit on the fucking studio. Jesus fucking Christ. They went in. They went in with that scene. I can't even play it on YouTube. I think this was BS from the Outer Worlds side because they gave Parvati a romance with Junlei, the engineer lady from the Groundbreaker, and that entire thing plays out like a romance path for the player, except the player is making the choices for Parvati. It's well done, but there was no reason why they couldn't whip out a couple more of these simple romance options for the crew members and the player. Regardless though, the things about The Outer Worlds that I enjoyed seeing choice in the game. That was my favorite part of it. The fact that I could set my intelligence to -1 and have a bunch of hilarious dumb dialogue options to use throughout the story. The fact that it mattered if I spec'd into intelligence or perception, and also the values that I had in lying, persuading, or even stuff like science and engineering. All of these things mattered in the way that you achieved your goals in The Outer Worlds. And for me, this is the kind of shit that if you include in your RPG, you are already a step above a lot of so-called RPGs that don't do any of these things, that just have a linear path for you to follow, with very little player agency and interaction. So there you go, I just gave you guys a speedrun of what I think of Outer Worlds. So basically, it was like this middle-of-the-road sort of experience to me where it knocked Obsidian down a few quality levels, but didn't necessarily knock them off the ladder completely, know what I mean? In my mind, Avowed Avowed is a make or break game for Obsidian. It's what's going to show people whether they have entirely lost what made them special as a studio or if they still have something worth holding on to. It can't just be all about options this time. This time they actually have to show us that they still know how to write a story. So, sorry for that super long setup, but I wanted to just make everything as clear as possible before we go into what happened right now. So in my last video, after showing all of that terrible behavior from Matt Hansen, and by the way, if you're still somehow unaware of what it was that happened, just know that he pretty much took a shit on his own game by announcing it loudly and clearly to everyone that, number 1, the game is going to be woke, number 2, the game is designed with the intent to be divisive and especially to piss off everyone who is not an unhinged far leftist, and number 3, that he is racist. It was the most amazing thing I ever seen. It was a terrific campaign, let me tell you. I walked in, I said, wow, I gotta hire this guy, Matt Hansen. Matt Hansen is the best promoter in American history. Probably ever, most likely ever. Some say that. Avowed, get it, February 18, great friend of mine, Matt Hansen, great friend of mine. Get his game. Around towards the end, I said that maybe with a little bit of luck this game is going to be fine if Matt Hansen's meltdown on social media was just an isolated case of concentrated lunacy that does not represent the studio. Although let's not mince words here, this studio is still working under Xbox Game Studios, which is absolutely a brand that has made it public more than once that they are all in on this DEI situation. I bang on this list so many times in my videos, but I can't help it. I always feel like even if just one of you guys and gals watching right now hasn't seen this, then it's worth putting it out there so that one more person knows about it. It's a list of ideological creative restrictions that Xbox Game Studios have to keep in mind when making their games. Check the previous video if you're interested in more information on it, and check this video if you are interested in even more information on these matters. So that was my hope. It was also honestly my hope that this Matt Hansen guy would have gotten the consequences of his actions for his despicable, unprofessional and discriminatory behavior, but instead what happened is that now the company itself, Obsidian, is banning people left, right, front and center for absolutely nothing. Basically, if you dare mention pronouns, you're going to get banned. They're on a complete banning spree, getting rid of people, be it on Twitter or their forums or Reddit. Look at this poor fucking guy. He's not even against the woke stuff, he was just expressing concerns, you know, about how woke is it going to be. Which is perfectly understandable in this climate because we just saw an RPG that should have been a total Game of the Year contender, a king among banners, get turned into a completely soulless, passionless slop, devoid of creativity, devoid of heart, devoid of... it's just sad. It's just fucking sad to see Dragon Age degenerate into such a sad, pointless game instead of being this massive return to form. Man, there's gotta be an alternate reality out there somewhere where BioWare got their shit together and made a banger that brought the whole gaming community together, kind of like Elden Ring back in 2022, instead of handing their franchise to ideologues who spent the last 10 years making Sims games. Anyway, the poor fuck that I was talking about asking questions got banned from their subreddit. Even people simply rightfully calling them out, asking about what they're going to do about Matt Hansen and his comments, are getting either banned or getting their posts deleted. Again, normal people asking normal questions, not trolls trying to bait them, not the Power Rangers of racism and transphobia assembling together or whatever the fuck it is that Power Rangers do, just regular customers with valid questions. Questions that are not only valid because of what we saw with Veilguard, which is very important. Like I can tell you guys right now, if I was a game director or if I was working at the publisher side of things and I saw what just happened with Dragon Age, I would be using it to promote my game. I would be setting myself aside from Veilguard as much as I could so that I could tell every disappointed fan that they could find their fantasy RPG fix in my game coming soon in February. But that's apparently something that's not on the list of priorities at Obsidian. Or maybe they just forgot, I don't know.
Just fucking slipped his mind.
The funny thing is that it's not even something that Obsidian hasn't done before. They absolutely used the momentum of how shitty Fallout 76 was in order to boost the hype for Outer Worlds, and it absolutely worked. I remember back then all the excitement and all the comments dunking on Bethesda and praising Obsidian for giving fans of that style of game the type of game that Bethesda refused to give them by instead doing an online live service. But not only that, another reason why these questions are valid, and indeed the main reason, is because all of this started with Matt Hansen, and it wasn't even provoked. Elon Musk didn't tickle his balls. Matt Hansen did all of this on his own. Every damning word came from him, and he himself caused the damage to the game's image through his own comments. It is only natural for people to have questions in regards to that, even if they're not mad, even if they're not petty enough like myself, who would like to see Matt Hansen reprimanded for being a fucking unhinged moron who needs to be humbled into a position where he will never put his own personal ideological agendas into his work. It's very normal for people to have questions about the integrity of the game and even the studio when Matt Hansen put it into question with his comments. Obsidian had a golden opportunity here to show everyone two things. Number one, that Matt Hansen does not speak for the entire company, and number two, that Avowed is not compromised as a game. And all they had to do, funnily enough, was do nothing. I mean, again, ideally they would actually do something. They would disavow Matt's statements and answer their customers' questions to the best of their abilities, doing their best to assuage their concerns. If they had done that, they would be golden right now. Even if they had lied, they would still be golden right now because, well, there would be nothing negative to talk about. I mean, there would still be Matt's previous statements, but at least the company would have made an effort to disavow the statements, which would have been a positive point. But even if they didn't want to do that, even if they didn't want to conduct themselves in the most relatable and customer-friendly way, then they could have at least acted professionally and did nothing. They could have stayed silent or simply given short answers to the easiest and least inflammatory questions that they could find and keep their fingers off the trigger. Instead, they took the worst road possible. They're banning people left and right just for asking valid questions over a screw-up from one of their own higher-ups at the studio. They're treating their fans and potential buyers like garbage. They're acting the exact same way that Matt Hansen would act. He made it clear that this game wasn't for those who disagreed with him politically and ideologically, and now we have a studio banning and silencing anyone who isn't fully on board with the claims that the game is going to be woke as fuck, fully on board with the pronouns even if they're just asking questions, and worse, fully on board with Matt Hansen's various despicable and exclusionary comments. And this was the absolutely worst thing that Obsidian could have done, and once again I am beyond confused at what's happening. I genuinely don't understand how this hive mind stuff happens. I don't understand how lunacy and delusion are at the helms of these multi-million-dollar companies and projects. Worse, trillion-dollar corporations if you count whoever is ahead of this stuff at Microsoft and not stepping in to put some sense into the minds of these people. They're alienating their customers and they're insulting them. And for the life of me, I don't get it. I don't understand. Like, I get it. I'm going to get into it in a second, but I don't understand how it's so widespread. Like, I don't understand how no one is around to stop it. Even during the plague of rampant monetization, the most you'd hear these companies gaslight us with would be like when EA said that, oh no, it's optional, it's nice, players get a sense of satisfaction and reward. You'd never hear these executives come out like, don't like it, don't buy it. Or something like, oh, what's that? You can't afford our battle pass? Poor people deserve to feel every sting of shame for the rest of their putrid lives. This is such a phenomenon of pure insanity to witness, and at this moment, aside from the thoughts that I already shared, speculating a bit here and there on their thought process in my video about the demonization of gamers, I can only really speculate further that this is owed to entitlement. I think that people like Matt Hansen and other activists infesting the industry don't really have their hearts in it. To them, whether a game succeeds or fails isn't really important. I think they're more than happy with sacrificing the properties that they're working on just so that they can inject their messaging into it and claim another territorial victory in their culture war. Either that or they're deluded enough to think that they're doing something that is profitable. But I don't really think that that's it. Like, you have to be living under a rock to think that way at this point. It's more than clear that this stuff doesn't sell, plus it doesn't explain their anger. Matt Hansen is an angry man. The shit he said is all coming from a dark place of hatred. So yeah, I think we're far beyond believing that they think that this is what sells. I'm pretty sure that they believe that they know that it doesn't. They just don't care. It's all about scoring points in this war in their heads. It's all about enacting their will upon us. It's all about getting far enough in a position of power and influence within the industry that they can grab a beloved thing that they know people are looking forward to and that they know has a very wide reach, which of course it does. It's a highly anticipated first-party Xbox game, their debut game working for Microsoft, and basically to claim it as theirs, to inject stuff into it that they know will piss people off because they know it is being done incorrectly. It isn't even that it's inherently hated. I think most people don't really give a shit about this stuff in a practical sense in their day-to-day. They may have their agreements or disagreements in their own personal views, but most people out here in the West aren't going to assault someone just for being gay or trans or non-binary, and that's if we even knew about it. Because if you stripped away all the retarded activists from TikTok and morons like Matt Hansen who want to inject this stuff, want to force it into everything, like dogs marking their territory, then most of us would be living our lives not even thinking about this, because the majority of these people would not even go around announcing to everyone in the vicinity that they're trans or what their pronouns are. So yeah, this stuff, it's not even that it's inherently hated. Like, the reason why so many people don't want to see it in video games, especially in fantasy settings like Veilguard and Avowed, is not because there's so many people who are hateful and bad, oh, apocalypse. It's simply because it does not belong in that setting, and the inclusion of it is stupid and unnecessary. There is a massive line that separates people who simply dislike this stuff and who simply or even disagree with, homosexuality, transsexuality, non-binary stuff, which is very common in religious people, and people who would actually enact harm on someone over it. And people have the tendency to conflate both of these things. They think that just because someone is against ideological injections into their media, especially in media that simply does not belong, like fantasy stuff such as this, which breaks immersion, then they are automatically these terrible people, the worst of the worst that the planet has to offer, people who would actually enact harm on LGBTQIA++ people, when in reality they're just people who don't give a shit. They don't care. They just want to engage with their entertainment without these immersion-breaking things coming in and snatching it from them. Someone's privilege to be represented through a pronoun menu or whatever else type of ideological things that these video games inject does not trump the vast majority's privilege of having their games being made with love and care for immersion and escapism as they are meant to be. Because immersion and escapism is for everyone. It's for you, it's for me, hell, it's even for people like Matt Hansen. We can all be included by simply not excluding anyone. A good piece of media, be it a video game, be it a movie, be it whatever, does not have a specific gender, race, or sexuality that it is appealing to. But a pronoun screen and other ideological injections are not for everyone. They're not even for everyone who agrees and sides with them politically. They only serve a very tiny minority of people who do not play video games for the same reasons that the vast majority of gamers do. We play games to experience something that is greater and completely outside of ourselves, and they play games to feel affirmed and validated by the video game. People like Matt Hansen and other activists in the industry do not care about this. In this aspect, I do believe that they are genuinely deluded, because they like to use arguments such as that straight white people were overrepresented in media. It's one of those arguments where it's like, pointless. It's Western media being made mostly by white people and other more light-skinned countries. So of course they'd make a majority of products that reflect them and the majority of their customer base, but it was never about pandering. It was never in the sense of validating them over other people. It was simply a character, and thanks to that, these games were enjoyed by masses of people all around the world, because the skin color or any other cultural aspects did not matter. What mattered was the contents of the character and the stories, and in the cases of games, the gameplay as well. To have all of this and simply focus on the race of a character because of their skin color makes these people using these arguments completely deluded with a racist obsession with race. We can all, regardless of skin color, gender, sexuality, and even religion or background, enjoy a good story with relatable human qualities. The same cannot be said for lame, dull, boring, ideologically driven content. But to them, this take is simply unacceptable. It's bigoted and rooted in white supremacy, which is hilarious given the circumstances. For them, it's either their way or the highway. I'm sure some of you have seen another meltdown a couple of days ago from an audio developer from an indie game who couldn't stand the fact that Asmongold and his community had found quote-unquote his game. The dude just can't handle it. He has like the biggest fucking streamer right now playing his game, giving it a great deal of promotion, which is something that companies would be willing to pay for, and he's losing it because to him, Asmongold, his whole community, and the people who relate to him are all terrible, disgusting, anti-gay people, despite the fact that Asmongold hasn't done anything against homosexuality at all. These people are sick in the head, dude. They need help, but instead of getting help, instead of being able to see that they are being deranged for no reason at all, they're just being affirmed in their bubbles. People like this, they have no respect for this industry, for their employers, or for their co-workers, or even for the very games that they are working on. All of these things must serve their ideological purpose, otherwise they are worthless. Their positions are assured, they weren't worked for, and the success of their games is irrelevant because passion does not drive them. If the games tank, they still got what they wanted, which was to own the chuds. Meanwhile, the supposed chuds, which is basically just a term for the majority of the gaming public at this point, are just doing their thing, playing something else because let's face it, there's plenty of games to choose from, while laughing at their ships sinking. And in the end, the people who get hurt are the genuinely talented people at these studios that actually love what they do. They just don't have the power to lead or enact change, so they must follow and watch it all burn down around them. Really, the only thing that they can do is just leak stuff out to people like Endymion and Legendary Drops, etc., who cover gaming news. Anger drives people like Matt Hansen and so many other activists in these lead positions and consultants across the industry, a vivid anger and hatred for their customers, for us, for gamers, and nothing good can be created out of that. At the end of the day, anger will consume them and leave them emptied. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you liked the video. I've been working on the last part of the Veilguard review. It's taking me a bit longer than expected because I genuinely don't feel like talking about it or even looking at footage of it. That's why I'm taking every excuse to talk about other stuff like this whole situation with Avowed, David Jaffe, and my video on the demonization of gamers. But yeah, I gotta get back to it and finish it. I did promise that I would, so I will. Until then though, I will see you on the next one. Much love to you all. Have yourselves a great day.